Okay, welcome back. So we're continuing Masechtas Chagigah as we started last week. And this time we'll hopefully get to do some Gemara, and we'll be covering. Let me not set any goals. How much we'll cover? We'll just see how the flow, how much we can, and how much we achieve, and we'll take it from there. So let me get this a little bigger. Perfect. So last week we started off with the Mishnah, and the Mishnah started off by saying everyone is obligated Beria, which we said means going up to the temple 3 times a year on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And then the Mishnah gave a whole list of people that are exempt from this obligation. Then there's 2 more sections to the Mishnah. I'm not going to go there now because the Gemara's job now is to come and dissect the Mishnah and tell us how to learn the Mishnah. Tell us what we see from this Mishnah. And that's how generally Gemara works. They would take a piece of Mishnah and then have a whole bunch of Gemara that goes onto that Mishnah and elaborates and explains. Now, I want to point out something here. The Gemara is not just to give us here information. The Gemara is not just going to come here and tell us this means this means A, this means B, this means C. That's not what the Gemara does. The Gemara is going to bring questions to us and then see how the Gemara is going to process with the answers. As we're going to learn later in the Masechta, later in this tractate, why the Gemara is written this way. The Gemara is written this way because the Gemara is not just here to explain the Mishnah. The Gemara is also here to teach us, to train our brains to have a Torah thinking mind, as we say the term of Das Torah. So the Gemara is going to start taking this Mishnah apart, and it's going to write out, and like thinking out loud, as to why is this written this way? What does this mean? And what can we learn from each and every word? So just like in the Torah, there isn't an extra letter or even an extra dot. Everything has a meaning, and the Gemara learns things from each and everything. The same thing is with the Mishnah. When the Mishnah expresses and the Mishnah says everyone is obligated, and then it starts giving you a whole laundry list, if I can use the term, of people who are exempt, then the Gemara right away jumps up onto this and says everyone is obligated. What do you mean everyone is obligated? You started up with the term everyone, and then you give me a big list of who's not. How does that work? Who do you mean when you say everyone? So that's how the Gemara starts. The Gemara says, we learned in the Mishnah, Hakol lasiya mai, question mark here. So the Gemara is asking, and the Gemara is basically asking us, and it's giving us into the thinking brains, putting on the thinking hat. When the Mishnah says Hakol, everyone, what does that mean? What is that? Usually it meant to include something else that we wouldn't have understood regularly. That's what I would say when someone says everybody, and then accept. So when you said everybody, you meant something with that. So to understand what, the Mishnah is going to go, the Gemara is going to go through now each and every exemption from the list and see that if there is room in that exemption to play with it a little bit, to see maybe we can push in there something that is not as clear, and maybe that's what he meant when he said everybody, and afterwards he said exempt. So there's something to play with this exemption. So this is how the Gemara is going to start playing it. So we start with the question, Hakala CMI. When we say everybody, whom does that include that this list doesn't exclude? So the Mishnah starts, the Gemara, the thinking mind starts looking at the list. It starts with the Chetz means exempt, Mecheresh, someone who is deaf. Okay, Gemara doesn't see room to play with it. Shoite, someone who's an imbecile. Kutan, someone who's very small, and we know this is not someone who's bar mitzvah and he's less than bar mitzvah, as we learned last week. It means someone who's as small that they can't even walk or they can't ride on the father's shoulders. So not much room to put in here. Tintomadrogeres, this is a people who we don't really know their gender, male or female. So not much room there. Woman, also not much room. But when it comes to Avudim, here slaves, here the Gemara says, maybe here we can push something in. Because the Mishnah says, Avudim sha'ayna meshechrim, slaves that have not been freed. Those slaves are exempt from coming to be Riyah, to come up to the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara wants to say, you know what? Lasia, you know what? When you say everybody, what it includes? It includes Misha Chetzia Eved Chetzia Ben Chayren, someone who is a half a slave. He's half slave and half free. Now, first of all, how can that happen? How can someone be half slave and half free? And Rashi explains right away, it can happen in two ways. But basically, the idea is that he had two owners. So let's say there was a father who passed away, he had a slave, and now his inheritance, he has two sons, and they both get an equal part of the slave. One of them freed them, the other one didn't. So this slave is now half slave and half not. So he's in a limbo state. And we're going to learn a lot about this later. But the Gemara is now taking this. Maybe this is a good catch as to where the Mishnah included that everyone is obligated. There is room here. And maybe this is where the Mishnah means that they are also obligated, someone who's a half enslaved. Another scenario where somebody can be half enslaved is when two people together bought the slave. It doesn't have to be an inheritance of a father. Just the idea is when there was a partnership that owned the slave, and then one of them freed them, so they could be half slave and half not. So the Gemara is happy with his answer, but the Gemara says, but it doesn't work for everybody. The Gemara says, Lurav Inna, there is later on page 4, we're going to learn that there is someone called Ravina, that he says, he says someone who's half slave and half free is exempt from having to go up to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara explains there, what's the difference? Where does he come up with this idea that half is still exempt? Because if you look at the Mishnah says it very clearly. The Mishnah says, Avudim sha'ayna meshechrim. The Mishnah doesn't just say slaves. The Mishnah says slaves that have not been freed. Originally, I would say slaves that a slave that has not been freed at all, he's exempt. He's fully enslaved, he's exempt. But if he's half enslaved, because he's half free, that means that he's already on his own somewhat, he's obligated to go. Ravina learns this part of the Mishnah that it says someone who has not been freed means he's not fully free. If he's half free, he's not considered free. Therefore, he says that the Mishnah exactly exempts him. If he has not been freed, meaning he's not fully free, he's just half free, then he's still exempt. That's where he's taking his stand, because this is how he's learning the Mishnah. So if you learn the Mishnah this way, then you have a problem. You cannot say that Hakol, everybody, would include this person as well, because the Mishnah clearly exempts him. The Mishnah clearly says that if he's half slave, he's still exempt, because Aina Meshechim, the way he learns, he has to be fully exempt. So the question comes back, according to him, Hakol lasiyamai. What will the word Hakol, which means everybody is obligated, what is that going to include? So now we're coming back to the Mishnah, to the list. So Avudim, we cross out, because Ravina says it means it needs to be fully free. So we're jumping to the next thing. The next thing is someone who is limping. He has a foot that isn't working. He's missing a foot, or he's limping. So the Gemara wants to say, you know what? It could be someone who is limping on the first day, B'yom Rishon, then especially B'yom Shani, and on the second day he got healed. So let's introduce now a new idea here. It's another thing that we're going to learn in the Gemara later. So you first understand what the Gemara is doing here. The Gemara is in every line grabbing something in from a totally outside place, trying to prove a point here in the Mishnah. And that's how the Gemara works. And it's to teach us as well that when we learn something, everything we have learned till today comes into play and has to fit with what we're learning now. Nothing can contradict. If it does, then you got to understand now. So where does that fit in with something I've learned here or something what I've learned there? So this is very fascinating how the Gemara does that. In every line, you see a totally new topic. So let me give the introduction to this topic. What are we talking here? We know Yom Tov is 7 days. Pesach is 7 days. Sukkot is 7 days. There's also an 8th day for Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeres. It's a Yom Tov for itself, but it's considered another holiday. So let's continue with 7 days. Shavuos is 1 day. But in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they had 7 days to fulfill their obligations. So there's an argument later in the Gemara, how does these 7 days work? Because there's offerings you have to bring. And the offerings is obviously obligated to bring on the first day. But there's a problem. There's only so much the Kohanim, the priests, and the Beis HaMikdash can do in 1 day. It's just impossible to bring everything in 1 day. That's one issue. Another issue is that a person, he had enough meat the first day. He can't consume that much. He needs to bring another offering later, that he doesn't have a fridge. He doesn't have where to store the food. He needs to bring them later in the days. So the idea is that when someone is obligated to bring his offerings, is the obligation on the first day. But since there's no way of fulfilling it for whatever reason, you can also fulfill the other days. Or each one of these 7 days is obligated. And as long as you haven't done it in one of these 7 days, you're still obligated to do it. So it's a very interesting, it's a very subtle difference, right? Very small difference. Why? Because what difference would it really make? At the end of the day, you have to bring if you haven't brought it, and you have all 7 days to bring it. The difference would come out, what if someone on the first day is exempt? For whatever reason, he's exempt. Remember, we had a whole list of exemptions that he didn't have to go up. So on the first day, he was exempt, but later, he's not exempt anymore. So here would be the difference. If each and every day has its own obligation, and as long as you haven't done it, you're still obligated, then the fact that you were exempt the first day doesn't exempt you on the second day. But if you would learn that everything is for the first day, the real obligation, the real holiday is the first day, but since you can't do it in the first day, you get to have another 6 days to fulfill it, then if the first day you weren't obligated, the first day you were exempt, then you'll never be exempt. So this is the difference to where this comes to play. So any questions? Am I clear on the differences from why the first day obligated versus the 7 days obligated? We're good, right? Okay. So now that the Gemara wants to use this as the answer as to why when the Mishnah said that everyone is obligated to go, it will include someone who the first day was exempt and the second day he's obligated. Meaning the first day he was limping, his foot hurt. The second day he healed. So the Gemara says, okay, but that's not to everyone. There's still someone that this won't work with. And it goes like this. Okay, for those who say that each and every day is an obligation for itself. And as long as you haven't done the mitzvah, you were obligated to do it this day, then okay, the first day he was exempt, second day is obligated. But according to those who say that everything is an obligation to the first day is the real obligation. The other days is only more time for you to fulfill what you were obligated to do on the first day. If that's the case, then he can certainly not be obligated to bring it the second and third day if he was exempt the first day. In that case, then our first question, when we say hakal, everyone is obligated, what does that teach us? It cannot work according to those who say that only the first day is Yom Tov and every other day is only a fulfillment for the first day. You cannot tell me because he was limping the first day. So the Gemara says, you know what? I cannot land on the word Chagigah, which means someone limping. I'm going to go one step farther. I'm going to go to someone who's blind. Okay, and let's see if we have room to push something in here to say, maybe there's an exception to something that's blind or not blind, and we can say that that person is obligated to go. So the Gemara says, you know what? La siya sima. I think this is where we're up to. It comes to teach us someone who is blind, ba'achas ma'aynav, with only one of his eyes. Interesting. So, of course, someone who is blind with both eyes, he's considered a blind person, and he's exempt from going. But here the Mishnah wants to tell us, if you're only blind with one eye, no, you're still obligated to go. You're not considered to be blind. And that's why he say Hakal everyone, because it means this. This time round, the Gemara is not challenging it. On the contrary, the Gemara is bringing proof to it that the Mishnah is actually giving us a chiddush. The Mishnah is telling us something that we wouldn't have known otherwise. We would have thought that someone who's blind with one eye maybe is exempt. Why? Because the Mishnah says, "Ideloi kahai tanya," and it's not to what we have learned in another place. And remember, we're already up to the fourth different thing that we're going to introduce here. Okay, we started off with Ravina, which he says someone who's half enslaved or not enslaved. We went to someone who the first day is so up to the third one. The first day he's exempt, but the second day is not exempt. Now we're coming over to a third one, someone who's maybe half exempt. His eye, and it didn't heal the second or third day. It's been like this all Yom Tov, but only one eye. And talking about this, it's going to come out later more, but I'm just touching on it right now. What if someone needs glasses to see? So both his eyes are weak. So that's also, is he exempt or is he obligated to go? Based on what we learn here, he's obligated to go until he's considered blind. If he's not considered blind, he's still obligated. But let's see what we learn. What is it that we learn that the Mishnah wants to rule out? Don't go according to that. So the Gemara goes on, the Tanya, because we learned Yochanan ben Dahavi, which is the name of a sage, Yochanan, the son of Dahavi, Aimer, he says, and he said it in the name, Mishim Rav Hida, he says it in the name of Rav Hida. It says, Sima ba'achas ma'ainav, if somebody is blind with one of his eyes, Huta Menoriya, he's exempt from having to go. And this is a very fascinating place from where he's saying that he's exempt. Shenemer, because it says in the Pusik, Yira Yairueh. So what does this mean? It means like this. There's, in the Torah says that when you go up to be seen, it's the Lushan Yira, but it's also the same word as Yairueh, to be seen. So in Hebrew, when you write Yira and Yairueh, you see it's the same letters, but different pronunciations in the bottom. I don't know how big it's on your screen, if you can see it. Maybe I can zoom in here. Yira Yairueh. So this shows that the same word could be pronounced in different ways. And he says that it works two-way street. You're coming to see Hashem. Hashem wants to see you, and you have to see Hashem. And he's comparing it like this. The same way when you come up there, you are coming to be seen. The same way you are coming there to see. So what does that mean? It means like this. Just like when Hashem sees us, it's interesting expression, but it says that Hashem sees us with both eyes, with two eyes. Now, does Hashem have two eyes, one eye, 10 eyes? I don't know. But it's the expression that he sees us with his full capabilities, that he sees us. He's not blemished. He doesn't have only a half an eye if he's meant to have two eyes. So just he sees us with his full strength. The same we should be able to come see is someone who has two eyes. So I want to pause here for a minute, because I want to say some fascinating ideas as to what the comparison is here. What are we comparing to? And then what does the Mishnah come and teach us onto this? So what he's saying here is that a person who's blemished on his eyes cannot or is exempt to go. Why? Because Hashem that sees him is not blemished on his eyes. So the idea of comparing us to Hashem, to the closeness, that we want to be seen and we want to see. And we want to see us fully, not just halfway. That's basically what he's pointing out here. To be seen fully by Hashem and by us. To be present there. Basically, don't come there and be busy on the phone. You're coming there to see and to be part of it and to be present with it. But the Mishnah says, not according to this. The Mishnah says, someone who is blind in one eye is still obligated to go. And this is the chiddush. This is the thing that we wouldn't have known if the Mishnah wouldn't have said it, because we would have thought that what he said here is a beautiful thing, and this is right. And then we have to come only if you can see with both eyes, full strength. Someone who needs glasses maybe would be exempt because Hashem doesn't need glasses to see us. That would have been the idea. So any questions here? Because now we're going to move on to a totally different field. Okay, so let's go on with this. So the Gemara is happy with this answer. The Gemara is not even challenging it. The Gemara is now coming back to something else. The Gemara says, "V'iboy Simon, you know what? I can give you another answer." So meaning the Gemara is so pleased with this answer, the Gemara says, I can take back to the previous question and even answer there. So where do we go? It goes like this. I can go back to what we have said before. What did we say before? We said that it means for someone who is half a slave and half free. Someone who is half a slave and half free, that person is obligated to go. So the Gemara asked, but according to Ravina, he says someone who's not fully free is exempt from going. He has to be fully free. So the Gemara says, you had this question before that Ravina says that he has to be fully free. Lo kasha. Don't get stuck on that. It's not a problem. Why? There's two Mishnahs. There's one that came before, then the one that came after. And the Gemara is going to explain here that Ravina himself has pulled back and changed his mind on what he said. And therefore, it could be answered according to everyone that the Mishnah is talking about someone who's only half enslaved, because someone who's half enslaved is obligated to go, because Ravina also pulled back on what he said. Where do we know that Ravina pulled back on what he said? So the Gemara is going to bring another Mishnah now, and we're going to see from there the arguments, how it went, and then we come back from there to learn that the whole idea of someone who's half enslaved is not really a possibility, and they have to free him. So the Mishnah goes like this: that Nan, we learned in another Mishnah, someone who's half enslaved and half free, he has to work for his master one day, one day, and one day he's free. He can do whatever he wants for himself. Divrei Beis Hillel. This is how it was learned in the house of Hillel. Hillel is again one of the sages, Hillel and Shammai. These two were very, very often two houses where they would have like two yeshivas, and they would learn different ideas, and they would exchange their opinions. So here, Hillel said, he's half slave, half not. He works for his master one day for himself. Amr by Shammai. So by Shammai comes with a question to Beis Hillel and says, and this is where we're switching over to the first page, which calls the first page, the second side. So it's Daf Beis, Omid Beis. So Beis Shammai asks the Hillel, "Tekantam es Rabbi, es atzmo lo tekantam." You fixed his master, you took care of his master, but he himself is stuck. You didn't help him. So what do you mean by you didn't help him? You only helped his master. So he explains himself. He says, someone who is enslaved is allowed to marry a woman that's also enslaved, even if that woman is not Jewish. Normally, a Jewish slave is not allowed to marry someone who's not Jewish. But if that slave that woman is also enslaved to this master, then she's obviously having to keep Torah. She has to keep to a certain degree Torah, and the Torah permitted the master to get them to marry each other so that he has kids that are slaves for him. So if he's fully enslaved, he could marry a shifcha. A shifcha means a girl that's a slave. But here he can't, because he's not fully slave. He's only one day slave. Every second day, right? One day like this, one day like this. So he cannot marry someone who's enslaved. And he cannot marry someone who's free either, because he's enslaved half all day. So what are you going to tell me? Livato? You want to tell me this person should just not get married? Just live by himself? You can't say that. It says in the Torah That Hashem said that it did not create the world only for people to have kids. And where do we see that? Because it says in the Pasuk, I did not create the world for people to sit by themselves, to not marry, to just be, I'm good, I don't need nothing. That's not the reason for creating the world. So the Gemara says, so that the world could sustain itself, that should be fair. We force his master, and we force the master to free him. But how is that fair for the master? The master just lost a slave. Even though it's only half a slave, he still lost them. So what we do is we give a letter or a contract to the owner with the value of his slave, this half value that he was, and this slave now has to go out there, work, and pay back his master so that he can pay up, so that he should be fully free. But we cannot leave him in limbo. We cannot leave him being half enslaved and half not. The master has to free him. Now the slave owes him the money for the half of his work. He has to work and pay that up back to his master. Once Shammai explained all that, is v'chazri Basilil lahoides kedivra Shammai. So Basilil agreed. He says, yes, you're right, and therefore there's no such a thing of someone being in limbo of half Avid, half slave, and half not. Therefore, Ravina also retracted and changed and sent back that someone who's half slave and half free is obligated to go. You know why? Because his master has to free him. So he's considered fully free, because being in that limbo state is not considered, is not something that's sustainable, cannot be there. Any questions here? Because I think we're going to pause here. This is a good place where we can stop. And here the Gemara is going to move on to a totally different subject. Okay.
No questions. It's really good.
Okay, great. So I'm going to repeat what we learned today, and I want to sum up, what does it mean to me? What am I walking away with learning today? Now, of course, we learned many, many different laws, different halachas, and we touched on to, I don't know, I lost count, 5, 6 different ideas, totally different ideas, different missions, that everything got brought into here to prove a point, to try to bring these arguments back and forth. I'm going to just quickly sum it up, and then what does it mean? What does it mean to me now? So Gemara started off explaining as to why everybody, and then a big list of who's not. The Gemara is left over in the end saying that it means someone who's half slave and half is not slave. And even Rav Inna, which he said that someone like this is exempt from going, he retracted, because in the end we know that he do have to go. But we also learned here that there is such a thing of someone being half slave and half not, and the masters are obligated to free him. And this is where we come back to the end, that it's so easy, which is another thing I want to take out from me here. It's so easy for a person to park himself. I'm going to park myself in a cave, make myself comfortable. I don't need to interact with anyone. Nobody bother me. I'll be so comfortable and fine. And he says, no. That's not why Hashem created the world. Go get married. Go have kids. Figure out how to raise them. Good luck. You get to work, because that's why you created. And after 120, you enjoy your little cave somewhere very comfortable. But until then, very strong lesson here. Go out there, get married, because that's what you're created for. So much so that the sages instituted that the master has to free that one slave. I don't know how often something like this happened, that someone was half enslaved and half not. But the master had to free that one slave so that he shouldn't be left in limbo, so he can also live life for the reason that he was born for. He shouldn't be stuck saying, okay, I don't have to get married. I have one master, it's good enough. No. You go out there, you get free, you go get married, you have kids, and you still pay back half of your worth to your owner. Wow, that's a life. You be comfortable after 120. For now, get a job. Another nice thing I take out from today, the idea of being seen and seen. Hashem is desired to see us. Now, of course, he sees us everywhere. The point is not, Hashem is everywhere, you see me where I am, why do I need... No. Hashem wanted us to devote time when Yom Tov comes around, go up to the Beis Hamikdash, see the miracles, as we're going to learn later in the Masechta, the miracles that were shown to the Yidden. They shouldn't just see that Hashem sees them, they should see Hashem loves them. As we're going to see, one of the things they saw there was the Kohen bringing the hot bread and showed them to everyone and says, look how Hashem loves you. It's Friday and we're changing the bread from last week to this week and it still smells like it just got out of the oven. It's amazing challah smell that comes out of the oven. That's an unnecessary miracle. You know, many other miracles that happened needed to happen for safety. For example, when dishes broke, the earth would absorb the glass so the Kohanim wouldn't cut their feet from raw glass. They all get absorbed in the earth and they would be safe to walk around. You know, that's a miracle, but you know what? That's a miracle that we needed. Otherwise, the Kohanim will hurt themselves and they'll be bleeding everywhere. But this miracle didn't need to happen. There was no obligation, there's no safety reason for the bread to still smell on Friday the way it smelled on last week Friday when it was brought out. So this is extra love. This is showing Hashem cares for us. Extra love. And this is something we saw. This is the idea of Yairua and Yira. It's not just seeing Hashem, seeing the miracles that happened there and to be it, experience it, live it. It's not just seeing and, oh yeah, I saw that yesterday and move on. No. Seeing and experiencing it like Hashem experiencing us, we want to experience Him. And that's the relationship that happens on this being Oile Regel. When we went to the pilgrim, when we went up to the Beis Hamikdash, hopefully very, very, very soon, we'll get to see it and enjoy it and live it. Anything you want to add? Anything you want to...
Amen. This is what I want to add.
Amen. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much today.
Thank you. It was definitely a great product.
Yes. Okay.